In Commander, there are so many different ways that you can build your deck. You can build your deck around so many different themes and archetypes, which is what makes this format so amazing. There's so much variety all the time. There's so much flexibility in the format, the commanders you can use, and there's so many different ways you can go about building your decks at all different power levels, speeds, and goals that your deck wants to accomplish. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Architects, a series that I have on this channel where we talk about different archetypes in Commander. If you guys enjoy this content, make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. The archetype we'll be talking about today is aristocrats. An aristocrat strategy is trying to sacrifice and use its own permanents to gain value for itself. This could be either through death triggers, enter the battlefield triggers, or a mixture of both. In most cases, you're going to be in the colors black and typically white as well. And you typically find creatures in this Orzhov combo that give you a bunch of value from both of those things happening. You might see other decks that like to sacrifice a lot, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are aristocrats decks. There are sacrifice themes in a lot of different colors, especially when you're using black, but that doesn't often mean that they are aristocrats. Aristocrats in most cases either like to combo off through these death triggers, either by making a ton of tokens or maybe triggering a death over and over and over again, or they want to slow the game down to almost a grindy halt where they're taking just a couple life each and every turn and using their value to slow you down as much as possible. Other sacrifice decks sometimes like to sacrifice from big power payoffs. Aristocrats is usually a lot more low to the ground, a lot more token focused, and a bit more complicated in its strategy. So today we'll be talking about what makes this strategy so good, the concept of holding the gun in Commander, and we'll look at two commanders that can help us build an aristocrat strategy ourselves. So without further ado, let's get into it. The aristocrat strategy is really good primarily for the reason that it is resilient. In most cases in Commander, no matter the power level, removal is always a great answer to most of your opponent's strategies. Players want their permanents to stick around and provide residual value, either through combat damage, or maybe a mana sink, or just being on the battlefield and getting passive effects that happen. Removing these is typically a great option. However, for aristocrats decks, this typically is exactly what they want you to do. In aristocrats deck with a cruel celebrant on the battlefield does not care if you board wipe their 30 tokens away because they know that it will be such a huge life swing that it's never worth it. But on the flip side, they still are holding up a sack outlet that can do that damage to you anyway. So in most cases, removal is a really tricky subject when it comes to how to deal with these decks. Not only that, but most of these decks have a lot of recursion in them themselves that allow them to get their creatures back anyways. When going up against an aristocrats player, I definitely would recommend you try and get rid of their sack outlets to begin with, and you try to get rid of their payoffs as best as possible. In most cases, they'll be able to get them back, but just having them get out there allows you to do the rest of your work from there. So like we said in that previous example, if they have a cruel celebrant on the board and 30 tokens, you want to get rid of the cruel celebrant first and then wipe the board. It's going to cost you more mana, but it's also going to save you 30 health. In a lot of ways, you really want to sequence your removal properly playing against them, and it's good to learn about what their key pieces are when you are playing against them. Ashnod's Altar, and basically any sack outlet, any kind of token maker, and of course the payoffs like a Zulaport Cutthroat or a Blood Artist. These are the three key factors that typically make an aristocrats deck function. So if you can find good ways to get rid of these or exile them, you'll be in a good spot. And as the aristocrats player, you want to protect these pieces as much as possible. You want to be able to run multiple of these payoffs so that you can have more resilience and redundancy in your strategy. If you just ran one Blood Artist effect, one, you most likely won't get the payoff as much as you might want, and two, if it gets exiled or gets permanently removed from the game, it's going to be hard for you to recover. In some cases, impossible for you to recover. So you want redundancy in both your sack outlets, your payoffs, and your creature makers or regenerators. So the biggest thing that makes these aristocrats decks really good is their resiliency. Another thing that's so great about aristocrats decks is that everything that you can see is on the board. There is almost no hidden information ever. Now this can be good for your opponents, but it's also very bad for your opponents. This is the concept of holding the gun in Commander. When you're playing the game and you have those three pieces that we're looking for, in most cases removal is really hard to come by, and removing the pieces at the right time is just as hard. Especially as an aristocrats player, you have all the pieces there and your opponents are going to have to sequence properly in order to make sure that you can't get the payoffs you want. But because you have all those pieces, you can just hold the gun, which means that you basically can use politics, and you can use your leverage of having such a good board state in ways that you might not normally get to do in other decks. In other decks, typically, you have the best board state, you're going to get targeted the most. But in aristocrats decks, if you have the best board state, you're probably just straight up in the lead and there's nothing your opponents can do. Because most of these triggers are at instant speed, anytime they try to remove something, you can almost always, in response, do your combo. Because of this resiliency in aristocrat strategies, holding the gun often happens more than other strategies. You want to use this to your benefit because now your opponents both have perfect information on your board, but they still have hidden information of what might be in your hand. You want to use your out in the open strategy to try to convince your opponents to do other things, do things for you, or typically just avoid your board state altogether. Holding the gun is an interesting strategy and allows you to really take advantage of your powerful deck and powerful board state, whereas in other decks you might not be able to. Having the best board state and having political power in the game is incredible. Because like I said, in any other deck, in any other aggro deck, if you have the best board state, it's easy. You just board wipe. Holding the gun in Commander is a super interesting concept. I love talking about it all the time because I do find in-your-face kind of strategies very impressive and very cool. I love my combat tricks and I love being able to hold up things and bluff my opponents out and have the almost fourth dimension of Commander. But sometimes it's really awesome to just have a great board state on the battlefield and know your opponents can't do anything about it, and leveraging that board state in order to get what you want in the game. It's a really cool concept, and I think more people should try to utilize it in their gameplay. So we've talked about why aristocrat strategies are so powerful, and we've talked about the holding the gun concept that typically aristocrats decks can use the most. So now that we know what aristocrats decks are kind of looking for, let's try to build a deck around something like this. So I have two decks for you today. The first one we're going to talk about is my Elenda the Dusk Rose deck. Elenda the Dusk Rose is an incredible commander and she's a very fast strategy. I like to play her very quickly to try to combo off as fast as I possibly can. In aristocrat strategies, I personally prefer to have one of those three key factors that we're looking for in the commands, either a sack outlet, a token/creature generator, or an enabler. Because of this, I really think Elenda the Dusk Rose is a great option, and because she can make so many tokens so easily, it's a very fast strategy. So let's get into it. With something like Elenda, since we're trying to go fast, we want to basically put in the normal, just kind of aristocrats good stuff strategies. We want to have the Viscera Seers, the Blood Artists, the Ashnod Altars. We want all of those things. Because we're making 1/1 tokens, something like a Skull Clamp is really nice as well. And the two really powerful cards are Blade of the Blood Chief and Cordial Vampire. These basically double the 1/1 counters that you might normally get on Elenda. Blade of the Blood Chief is actually tripling it too, as Elenda will see something die and Blade of the Blood Chief will see something die. So you'll get 3 +1/+1 counters. We then want to make plenty of mana and have plenty of ways to make sure that Elenda sticks around even after we sacrifice her to some of these effects. Things like Not Dead After All and Supernatural Stamina is awesome. These effects allow us to sacrifice Elenda, get the token entering the battlefield payoff, and then immediately have her come back. An enchantment that's really awesome is Gift of Immortality, as aristocrat strategies are already hard to deal with. Gift of Immortality forces your opponent to have to remove Elenda twice in one turn if they want to get rid of her for good. And I say for good, but you'll just recast her for 6 the next turn if she does. Anything like a Phyrexian Altar or Ashnod's Altar basically means you win the game in this kind of strategy, as you can constantly sacrifice Elenda, make a bunch of tokens, and have that mana be able to recast Elenda, which then makes more tokens, which then makes Elenda bigger, which then you can sacrifice Elenda again and repeat the process. Almost like a food chain combo, but with no green. Because of this, you can get near infinite Blood Artist and Cruel Celebrant triggers, and you'll typically win the game from there. It's not necessarily a combo deck. None of this is usually actually infinite, unless of course you have an Ashnod's Altar out and a Phyrexian Altar out, and your Elenda is already at a 10 power, in which case you'll be able to probably net enough mana to do this infinitely. But in most cases, you're not going to have that. You're going to have to be good enough to string together these combos, control the game until you get there, and make sure you're protected enough when going for it. This deck is extremely powerful, it's extremely fast, and because you're not really casting spells during the combo, you're usually uninteractable anyways. The only time they'd be able to interact is by removing something, in which case you can just stack triggers on top of the removal and keep going. This is a deck I own in person, and it's an extremely cool deck. I love playing Elenda all the time. Now, the next deck allows us to slow it down a little bit, as well as bring down the budget quite a bit as well. Bartolom is the commander of choice, and we make sure to have Luris as a companion. This deck is much cheaper. You might have actually seen that Talarian Community College segment on it. They did a strategy very similar to this, and we have a very similar strategy as well, but I have my own takes on it, and I have just a bit more cards in there that can keep the consistency up as best as possible. In this deck, we are going pretty greedy. We're only running 32 lands. Now, before you kill me, okay, you just have to mulligan properly. If you mulligan to 3 lands, you have your mana curve set. You might be able to only cast a couple spells per turn, but in all of my test hands, I have never once run into the problem of being land dry. Bartolom, or Mr. Bart from now on, is a lot more grindy of an aristocrat strategy. This is the strategy that wants to control the board as best as possible. This strategy allows you to keep the board at a halt, grinding halt almost. It has plenty of outs with tutors and board wipes. The tutors are here to help set up your combos as best as possible, and this is the true aristocrat's function of sacrificing something, recurring it for value, sacrificing it again, recurring it again, and just looping certain value pieces over and over until you can eventually assemble either enough death triggers from grinding the game out, some extort triggers through blind obedience, or even the infinite combo of metallic mimic and lesser masticore or putrid goblin. This combo will allow you to get infinite 1/1 counters on Bartolom and infinite death triggers, which is really nice. And the rest of the deck is just trying to be able to loop all these valuable pieces until you can find this combo, or until you can kind of get the game to a halt. We have things like Accursed Marauder to make sure that your opponent's board stay as low as possible. Stuff like Selfless Savior and Selfless Spirit that allow you to keep things protected. This deck can go both ways, but your main goal should be to grind out the game as much as possible. You might want to use your tutors to go find the combo immediately, but the more effective strategy is to use your tutors to find a value piece like an Ichor Wellspring for draw card, or Prize Statue for mana, and finding your Blood Artist and Cruel Celebrant effects that you're looking for. This will provide you residual value over the entire game, and your other tutors can go find your combo from there. Or you might just stumble upon it as the game goes on. This deck is only $100. And it still is very effective at what it needs to do. You have plenty of ways of getting rid of creatures, getting rid of artifacts and enchantments, and you have easy ways to win throughout the game. I highly recommend you look at both of these decks and determine which one you might want or which one you're just most interested in. I think both of them are really cool, and I love playing them all the time. To conclude about aristocrat strategies, aristocrats are incredibly resilient, and they offer a lot of fun gameplay that typically you don't have in other decks. It's a very in-your-face strategy, as you will be an opponent to the strategy. You'll see things happening, and you know you just can't do anything about it. But as the aristocrats player, you love this. You're able to use your advantage as leverage against your opponents to help you get further into the game and maybe allow your opponents to do your bidding for you. Because there's so many loops in Magic the Gathering now, oftentimes aristocrats decks can turn into kind of combo decks, and while that's not necessarily the best thing ever, it is just a fact of life. I think aristocrats is a really cool strategy. You don't have to go with Orzhov. You can pick up other strategies in this. Rakdos is also a great one. Mardu is also another one if you want to add red. And Abzan and Esper are really great options if you want to slow the game down even more. Personally, I don't know why you would want to do that, but you certainly can. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, that has been my video about aristocrats. Thank you for joining Architects. If you guys have enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Thank you so much.